Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Laughing at Myself, My Education in Congress, on the Farm, and at the Movies, by Dan Glickman. Narrated by Joe Barrett. Chapter 1. What a country! Where else but in America could a nice Jewish kid, born in the farm state of Kansas, grandson of Russian and Eastern European immigrants, son of unconditionally supportive and entrepreneurial parents, end up as a 9-term congressman, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, and chief lobbyist for Hollywood? One might think that my background, birth location, and ethnicity would have been a disincentive to achieve much more than a career in my father's scrap iron business. Then again, there were not a lot of Jewish farmers around to be role models either. My story, like so many others of similar backgrounds, children of immigrants with encouraging, ambitious parents, a natural desire to strive for higher goals, and frankly a lot of luck and good timing, shows how anyone can achieve relative greatness in many different ways. Things did not always go how I hoped. I won elections and lost them too. College was not always easy academically. Once in a while my religion was a barrier to achieving my goals. Even though there was a lot of love in my immediate family, my parents did not have a perfect marriage, and I experienced my share of family conflicts, which sometimes involved a lot of loud fighting between my mother and father. I hated that. They were never physical, but their language could get abusive. This made for a strange and often frustrating mix of hostility and mutual love. But aside from their own issues, my father and mother were each unconditionally supportive of their kids, in good times and bad. Growing up as the middle child in this type of environment caused me to avoid controversy and conflict at any cost. In my high school yearbook, a girl named Carol, who I had a crush on, wrote that I was a good guy who shouldn't try to please everyone all the time. I'm sure the conflicts I witnessed for so many years played a role in how I came to avoid any third-party conflicts and hope everyone would like me. Eventually, once my siblings and I left home, our parents began to get along much better. Sound familiar? I think so. Through experiencing similar struggles, most of us can understand each other better, which is essential if we are ever going to make genuine progress in this world, and God knows we need all the progress we can get. In my case, I have always been driven by a desire to keep my reputation intact. From an early age, my father and grandfather used to pound into me the priority of a good name and being well thought of by others above almost anything else, including money. As a result, everything I have done in my personal and professional life has been influenced by an effort to preserve my good name, even in the context of controversial issues and conflicting experiences. As the Bible says, a good name is more precious than all the gold in the world. This philosophy has served me well through many unpredictable and troubling times. Born at the end of World War II, I have witnessed my fair share of history, from the Vietnam War era to the Civil Rights Revolution to the Trump era, with several other mind-bending twists and turns along the way. My childhood and young adulthood trained me to adapt to most of the challenges I faced by finding ways to work around problems and by being creative and imaginative when looking for solutions. But the key to my meeting most of these challenges has been in recognizing that a strong and credible self-deprecating sense of humor is my strong suit. It has opened doors and allowed me to learn how to get along with people, convincing them to like and trust me, and in the process get things done. Being likable is only one step in getting people to vote for you. At the core, you have to stand for something and be principled. Otherwise, you become just another empty suit. You must share your principles with a sense of courtesy, and, as I found along my way, with a tone of moderation and a willingness to keep an open mind. After all, moderation is as much about attitude as it is about ideology. Back in the 1980s, when I laughed each night watching the Johnny Carson show, I used to enjoy occasional guest Yakov Smirnoff, the Ukrainian Jewish comedian who based his immigrant shtick on the humorous welcome to New York he received after living in a proverbial Soviet gulag for most of his younger years. Smirnoff's sitcom What a Country demonstrated the wonder he felt at the unique, crazy, and wonderful daily life he found here in America. He made fun of simple things we take for granted, like toilets flushing, a lack of lines for buying basic necessities, and less daily confrontation with police. Smirnoff also once said something quite wise. Laughter is the shortest distance between two people. This had a great influence on me. As you will discover repeatedly in this book, humor and laughter served as the glue that kept our family together, and the foundation of much of the success I have been able to achieve in my life. In fact, the music of laughter was a constant soundtrack as I grew up, and I'm always happy to hear it wherever I am. My dad used to say that if folks think you are funny, not at their expense, and they like you, then you are much more likely to weather controversy and get things done, or, at the very least, you will accomplish something, even if they really don't like you. The point is, most of the time, what's most important is getting things done, not scoring points for being right or funny. In many cases, in fact, whatever works could be the motto of the day. Watching how my parents thwarted disaster by treating people, rich and poor, with respect and care, and always with humor, was especially instructive for me and still inspires my style. Sadly, humor is an underrated commodity, but it's something I highly recommend. If only we could have it officially prescribed throughout the hallways and meeting rooms of our Congress, public schools, and private homes. Laughing with and laughing at, however, are two different things. Sharing your own mistakes and owning up to your own foibles in a self-deprecating way helps to break the ice in new or awkward situations. Failing to acknowledge even the simplest of mistakes turns people off. I'm not sure former President Trump ever learned that basic lesson. He never seemed to listen to anything except thoughts that reinforced his pre-existing views. Frankly, he is a bonehead when it comes to taking advice. The art of listening is one of the great gifts God gave us. He felt so strongly about it that he gave us 2 ears, not one. This is a huge problem in Washington, D.C. Listening often means not jumping to rash or uninformed conclusions. It also encourages independent thinking. I often think that if there were 2 qualities that great leaders, political or other, should possess, it's the ability to listen to and learn about alternative points of view, and when you do disagree, you must not do so disagreeably. That's hard to do in this age of social media, when instantaneous and provocative responses are rewarded by the masses. My mother used to advise me that since I had 2 ears and 1 mouth, I should speak much less than I listen. That same advice, which has been passed on countless times from parents to children, was something I often failed to follow while growing up, and I usually suffered whenever that happened. Gradually, though, I figured out that she was right, and that credo led me to lead a solutions-based public life, which is probably the reason I've rejected political extremes on all sides and have often felt more comfortable as someone operating in the middle of the road, even though this position is not necessarily relished in today's political climate. I hear the naysayers preaching stubborn extremism as the only way to make real change, but I beg to differ. In my mind, moderation is the only way to achieve what Daniel Webster encouraged when he said the goal of a public servant was always to do something worthy to be remembered, which for me means substantial action to help people instead of empty words to drive them apart from each other. By the way, moderation is not a code word for weakness, but an acknowledgement that America is a diverse country and it takes a wide policy perspective to satisfy as many people as possible. Following the principle of active listening is central to this happening. Resiliency has been the other central attribute that has guided me to finding success in politics and life in general. It's not merely making lemonade out of lemons, although who can argue with that? Learning from genuine adversity means creating new opportunities far beyond merely surviving a challenge. We can all agree that shit happens in life, but the trick is whether you can rise above it and create something new and positive from what once seemed so negative and hopeless. Sometimes all it takes is a simple attitude adjustment and a willingness to solve problems in new and different ways. Ad aspera per aspera, or to the stars through difficulties, is the Kansas state motto, which is a good attitude to adopt when it comes to dealing with the uncertainties and vagaries of life. Essentially, we must never give up. Sometimes that means simply keeping an open mind and heart, even when circumstances don't suggest an immediate benefit for that approach. For example, when I faced an ethical challenge while serving in Congress, this was central on my mind. A 1992 scandal called Rubbergate, described in detail in Chapter 10, infected Washington and the nation with allegations of politicians, including me, bouncing checks. This struck a dagger into what I believed was a good and honest reputation I had earned, built up over the years with a combination of intelligence and good judgment. During that time, I had accumulated a lot of goodwill, which helped, and my sense of humor came in handy, too. But being funny while stupid was not enough. I needed to preserve and at times rehabilitate that good name and the sense of guilt that goes with worrying about it. When my honesty and trustworthiness were in question, that was always a deep blow. I also carried a fair amount of Jewish guilt, sometimes believing I had committed acts of wrongdoing that occurred 10,000 miles away from home. Being caught up in the house banking scandal left me feeling naked and fully exposed to the world. This was due in part to the constant reach of cable television news, which made sure the world knew that I had bounced personal checks. Technically speaking, I didn't really bounce any checks. They were unintentional overdrafts, which were always covered by the Office of the Sergeant-at-Arms, but to the public and media they were bounced checks. Without knowing all the facts, people who knew me no longer thought of me as nearly perfect. Being exposed like that was no fun, especially for someone who had always done his level best to avoid personal controversy and believed that his personal reputation was vitally important. It also challenged the notion in some circles that maybe I was not so likable and that my toothy smile was hiding something more insidious. Ironically, it is my natural self-deprecating sense of humor that became an enormous help in swallowing some humble pie and getting me through this and other challenges. As a partial result of Rubbergate, I lost my re-election to Congress in 1994 after a successful 18-year career, and just 5 weeks later, as I was thinking I may have no future in public service, I was nominated by President Clinton to be the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. This was pretty amazing, since I would have given up my House seat voluntarily to take that job. Years later, I became head of the Motion Picture Association of America, a job many thought was the best job in all of Washington, D.C., in large part because I was in the right place at the right time, when the iconic leader of that organization, Jack Valenti, decided to retire. Clinton and Valenti both liked me, so that was pretty much it when it came down to being offered those positions. Obviously, I was at least marginally qualified, but I think the real reason I got those jobs was because Clinton and Valenti thought that the people who would be working with me would be well-respected, motivated, and appreciated. The truth is, my story could only happen here in America. As the grandson of poor immigrants from Russia, where my grandfather, Jacob Glickman, escaped from religious persecution in 1910 and came to America to seek refuge and freedom, I was given every opportunity to succeed, initially by my parents, who knew the value of jumping when opportunity knocked, being positive and optimistic about the future, and not taking themselves too seriously. They knew, and I hope you will too, that our country, despite reports of doom and gloom, is not going to hell in a handbasket. Despite all the negativity and constant infusion of political discord, our country is a legitimate beacon of civility. We have a rich history of overcoming our divisions and uniting behind a common purpose, handing the next generation a better America. Even though America has plenty to be proud of, this success is not guaranteed in perpetuity. Our institutions are strong, but a perilous failure of leadership at the top, whether it's the presidency or otherwise, can seriously damage this country's historic position here at home and around the world. It's been said that one man with courage makes a majority. Conversely, one person with no shame or real character can destroy a country's reputation and purpose for a very long time. I find it deeply disturbing that so many people consider this kind of behavior acceptable or are not willing to actively confront it. I still believe in the words of Anne Frank, who wrote in her diary about her belief in the basic goodness of humankind. This may be naive, but it is core to my beliefs. I believe adversity can be overcome, and that when faced with great obstacles, Americans will rise to the challenge. Although politics today is often more dysfunctional than productive, we can change that paradigm if we unite together and listen respectfully to our differences. What a concept! As Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers stated so eloquently, our values will always be based on equal opportunity and the ability of everyone, no matter their background or where their grandparents came from, to thrive. The United States can continue to lead in the world if we stay true to those values, but we must be vigilant and somewhat relentless in reminding ourselves of our greater purpose and potential. Since I left public service, I have seen the value of this unified approach through my work at the Aspen Institute and the Bipartisan Policy Center, working with numerous think tanks to make positive change. I hope to use my lifetime of experiences, good and bad, to help change the world. I don't take that responsibility lightly, although I am not opposed to lightening things up a bit in our nation's capital. That reminds me of a story my dad used to tell about a conversation between an American kid and a Russian kid. "I have it so free," the American kid says. "I can go to the gates of the White House and yell at the top of my voice, 'To hell with Ronald Reagan,' and nothing will happen to me." Not to be outdone, the Russian kid responds, "This is no big deal," he says. "I can go to the gates of the Kremlin and yell, 'To hell with Ronald Reagan,' and nothing will happen to me." I'm not sure how that story applies to the Trump-Putin love affair, but perhaps I will run into Yakov Smirnov again, and he can explain it to me. All I know is that his "What a country" line always rings true for me, too. What other country in the world would select a nice Midwestern fellow like me to assume the role of designated survivor, which I was during the State of the Union address in 1997, when I was, temporarily, placed in a secure location and directly in line to become President of the United States in the event that a national catastrophe had struck Washington, D.C., and wiped out the upper echelon of America's leaders. I've had many experiences as a survivor, but that one night was more poignant and ironic than any survivorship I had ever known, which I describe in detail in the next chapter. The rationale is that if anything disastrous should occur to those politicians, someone is ready and able to provide continuity of government. That someone was me, and the minutes I spent in hiding were surreal, but they also encompassed what I learned over a lifetime of public service, that through hard work, dedication, and a bit of luck, America will give you the opportunities to succeed, allowing one to reach unimaginable heights. Even though I was Jewish, I was still a white kid from the Midwest. Although overt discrimination against me sometimes hurt, it was pretty mild. As we have seen in events in recent years, a young black man in America faces the calamity of racism on a daily basis, and this reality remains one of the greatest of all stains on the American experience. One of my greatest legacies, discussed later in the book, is my role in helping to eliminate the legacy of racism among African American farmers. Notwithstanding, I have learned that moments of glory are fleeting. Being at the top can often be followed by a crashing fall to the bottom. Ultimately, it is how you react to challenges that truly matter and define who you are, as you look in the mirror and communicate with others. During high school, I thought I was hot stuff when I became the election commissioner of our Southeast High School elections. We asked students to register to vote in advance as part of maintaining election integrity. Guess who lost all the filled-out registration forms 2 days before the election? Me. Yours truly, the election commissioner. We decided to handle my screw-up by not letting the kids know all the registration materials had been lost. Instead, before they voted, we just had them certify that they had registered. This same guy grew up and ran for Congress 10 times. I guess I may have learned something from this early foible. As for my ability to make sense of a few things for you, I have learned so many life-changing lessons from each one of my careers. As president of my 6th grade class at Fabrique Elementary School in Wichita, as a hometown lawyer, as a congressman from Kansas, as secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as president of the Motion Picture Association of America, as director of the Institute of Politics at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, and through my work at the Aspen Institute and Bipartisan Policy Center, trying to build bridges between Republicans and Democrats. I know what you may be thinking. Is that even possible? Yes, I assure you it is, even though I must admit that surviving in Washington, D.C. and Hollywood is not for the faint of heart. Hollywood is filled with creative, imaginative people, some of the smartest folks I have ever worked with, but some of those people are not terribly forgiving and have not learned the golden rule. It's a tough business, filled with enormous egos and gigantic consequences for failure. I recall a legendary story, apocryphal and, while perhaps exaggerated, is likely true, that when the famous Louis B. Mayer, one of the founders of the iconic film studio MGM, died, thousands of people attended the funeral. In fact, it was one of the largest funeral crowds in history. The story goes that the crowd was so large because so many people he treated badly wanted to make sure he was dead. I have often said that Hollywood is Washington on steroids. On the other hand, those who do survive both worlds usually have learned that how you treat others is key to personal and economic success. I am happy to say that through it all, I have never lost my ability or willingness to listen, admit when I was wrong. Yes, I've actually done that and still do. Learn and adapt to changing trends, build lasting friendships, think big, leave something of value behind for the next generation, and maybe most valuable of all, cultivate an ability to lighten up and have a few laughs along the way. There's an old joke I often tell about the businessman who speaks to a group of high school students and gives them this advice. You need to remember that you have to jump when opportunity knocks. One of the students says, "That's great for you as a successful businessman to say that, but the real question is, how do you know when opportunity knocks?" The businessman replied, "You don't. That's why you have to keep jumping all the time." That has been my credo in politics and life. Keep jumping and looking for opportunities, regardless of the challenge or possibility of defeat. Keep your humor, too, when things don't necessarily go your way. It helps when we remember that we are not the most important person in the world, that humility is a key factor in getting ahead, and when shit does happen, which it invariably will, what really matters is how you survive it, learn from it, and make it a building block in your life and career. Life is short, power is a fickle thing, and you never know what's around the corner. This is a nation built on opportunity and optimism, which was true 200 years ago and still holds true today. So if a memoir full of good things have happened for me, a Jewish kid from Wichita, Kansas, why not for you too? We are all designated survivors in one way or another of a complicated and tough world. Some of us fare better than others, and economic and political success are not the only determinants of survival. Outside factors such as repressive and authoritarian regimes can often impact our respective welfare. This is my opportunity to share my ingredients for not just surviving life, but living it with purpose, passion, and optimism. I have learned many tricks of the trade, which will hopefully be helpful to aspiring politicians, but I recognize that my life is not totally replicable for everyone. Changing the world is not easy, no matter where you are from or going, but I am convinced that the toxicity of our current political environment might be mitigated by some of the principles that have guided my life. A strong sense of humor, respect and civility for those who have different perspectives and points of view, a belief system founded on values based mainly on the golden rule, looking at all times if possible to solve problems, and not creating irreconcilable conflicts. Like the old saying goes, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it. If only certain people in charge today would heed this lesson, the world would be a better place. May I suggest that we don't wait for this to happen by itself, and that we take change into our own hands? I have mentioned that the President of the United States can be an instrumental force in setting a positive tone by encouraging people to treat each other with dignity and even love. Most presidents, including those I disagree with on policy, can bring out the best in us. It wasn't just Lincoln, Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower who could do this. From Kennedy through Obama, each has seen that as part of their job as president. Even Nixon demonstrated positive leadership at times. But in my humble judgment, these qualities were dangerously missing in former President Trump, much to the detriment of us all. By the way, Smirnoff also said, "I believe laughter is the language of God, and that we can all live happily ever after." What a country indeed. And it's our obligation to fix it. Chapter 2. The Most Powerful Man on Earth. More than any other experience in my life, the brief time I spent as the most powerful person on earth was utterly sobering. For a few hours on Monday, January 20th, 1997, I was next in line to assume the office of the Presidency of the United States of America should the unthinkable have happened. That was the one and only time I was the designated survivor. Our need to have a plan of succession in place is so compelling that the ABC television network created a series based on this theme, the aptly named Designated Survivor, starring Kiefer Sutherland. The soft-spoken yet fearless Tom Kirkman, fictional Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, was named the designated survivor in this political action fantasy. Much to his horror, he becomes President of the United States after the U.S. Capitol is destroyed in a major terrorist attack. I can greatly empathize with Kirkman because there's no training or real-world experience that properly prepares one to contemplate such a circumstance, let alone actually become the de facto ruler of the free world. Unfortunately, the series was canceled after a 2-year run on ABC, but it did manage a 3rd season on Netflix. Perhaps if the hero had been the Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, instead of the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, it would still be on the air, and they would be consulting me for the inside scoop. At the time, I thought that my kids and wife would be proud of me, but would still make fun of my foibles. I would go down in history as the first Jewish president if the unthinkable happened. I hoped that the public would accept me and we could avoid a revolution. But truthfully, I took most of it with a grain of salt. The odds that President Clinton and all of the other constitutionally designated successors would be killed was so remote that I just viewed it as a fun experience few others would have, and it would give me some good stories to tell. My mother could tell her friends that her son was the almost president. Here's how it works. During political gatherings, where the entire government is present, a natural-born citizen over the age of 35, usually a member of the cabinet, is selected to become the designated survivor. That individual is given presidential security, including a military officer carrying the briefcase with the nuclear codes, and transportation to an undisclosed, secure location. Should the President of the United States, Vice President, Speaker of the House, and members of the Cabinet all be killed, the designated survivor assumes the role of President to ensure that a governing authority remains in power. We designated survivors are an elite club. Gatherings of this type, with all of these political figures assembled in one place, are rare and usually occur only for presidential inaugurations, State of the Union addresses, and perhaps official state funerals. In fact, since 1981, Secretaries of Agriculture have been selected to occupy this role 7 times, tied with Secretaries of the Interior, more than any other cabinet member, which may suggest that we, creatures of the land, are seen as natural replacements for such high office. I have subsequently learned how other designated survivors spent their 90 minutes of trepidation. Bill Daley, who was the Commerce Secretary under Bill Clinton, was the designated survivor in 1998. He spent the night rather informally with family and friends. Tommy Thompson, who was Health and Human Services Secretary under President George W. Bush, had a tougher time since he served in this role only 11 days after September 11, 2001. His concerns were far more magnified, and justifiably so. Given the recent attack, Vice President Cheney was designated as a backup survivor that night, hidden away in a secret bunker during President Bush's address to a joint session of Congress. With the exception of those serving immediately following 9/11, I believe that we all shared the same odds of the entire U.S. government being wiped out as I had of becoming a Major League Baseball player. I was informed of my impending role a couple of weeks before the 1997 State of the Union speech. The White House Chief of Staff called my Chief of Staff at the USDA and asked if I were available, which wasn't exactly a call to vet my presidential qualifications. I was honored to be selected, but if I am completely honest, there was the tiniest voice in the back of my head thinking something altogether unexpected. God forbid it happens. I could be the first Jewish president of the United States.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?